So we had brought, it's a very simple machlokes. We had discussed the machlokes about on pei beis amid beis on the bottom. Machlokes, which was a bunch of different people. Rav Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, was arguing with Rav Nachman, Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. And they were arguing. So this basically comes down to machlokes between Rabbi Yosef and Rava, b'shem Rav Nachman, about how far apart a group of trees has to be when someone buys 3 trees. So we say sometimes it's treated as you bought a orchard, a mini orchard, and the purchaser, the lekeach, gets also the karka underneath. But that depends on those trees being arranged in a way that they are unified. They have something to do with one another, so they can't be too far or too close. If they're too far apart, then they're just individual trees. If they're too close, then the ones that are too close are not sustainable in that way. So they're going to end up being taken down, so they don't get counted. So there was a machlokes that Rav Yosef said essentially that the minimum and maximum is they can't be closer than 4 amas, and they can't be more than 8 amas. And Rava said b'shem Rav Nachman that's from 8 until 6. And then we brought a raya to Rav Nachman.
8 to 16. 8 to 16.
8 to 16. I misspoke, right. So then we brought a raya to Rava b'shem Rav Nachman that it was from 8 to 16 from a Mishnah by Yekerem, where it uses a measure of 16 amas. It has to be within 16 amas. And we had a Maisa that corroborated that Mishnah. And then Abaya responded. So Abaya was the one who said to Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef responded to Abaya. It's interesting. Abaya was backing up Rava, who's usually his disputant. So Abaya backed up Rava, b'shem Rav Nachman. And Rabbi Yosef responded, I don't know about your story, but I know about these Bedura Derusa, these shepherds that came to Rav Yehuda, and he said, oh, you go up, you have to be 4 amas apart. It has to be a minimum of 4 amas apart in order for there to be a din that they're treated as separate. Okay, so that's what we're up to. So now we're 6 lines down on Pei Gimel Amud Aleph. So all of that is going to be necessary. As you can see, the Gemara is just going to get into the nitty-gritty of what these shitas are. So tomorrow, Rav Yosef Milay Tanan. Rabbi Yosef just brought this story that then Rav Yehuda corroborated it. But we have a mission like Rabbi Yosef. Rameir of Shimon Oimrim, Hanoitas Karmoi Shmoina Amas al Shmoina, Motel Hevi Zer L'Sham. Someone has 8 amas in between his rows in a kerem, so that's enough that the 2 parts of if they're 8 amas apart, they're no longer considered to be part of the same grouping, and therefore they're not considered to be a kerem, but rather they're individual vines. And as long as you keep 6 tvachim away from each vine, you could plant in between them. So you see that the measurement is 8 amas, not the measurement is 4 to 8 amas, not 8 to 16. So it's true that you have a Mishnah, but we have a brisa like it, which is against Rabbi Yosef. It's like Rava, and in addition, we also have a Maisa that corroborates that Mishnah. So a Mishnah without a story against the Mishnah with a story, we go with the Mishnah with a story. Now the Gemara sums up what we know. Bishlam Rav Yosef alider shemin shamin ale mufuzar shamin ale ritzuf. We find out both the maximum amount, how far they have to be, if they're too thinly spread, the measurement is that it can't be more than 8 amas, and the minimum, it can't be less than 4 amas. Mefuzarin hadamar. We just brought the Mishnah that said that a kerem is, if it's more than 8 amas apart, one row from the next, they're considered to be too widely dispersed, and it's not going to have a din as a united vineyard. Ritufin, and that it can't be too densely planted. It's non kerem hanatua apachas medal amas and a kerem. Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says that if it's less than dalad amas, and it's also not a kerem, then it's considered you're going to have to remove those vines. Just point out that as it's going to become relevant, the amount of vines that it gets a din of a vineyard is really 5. So if you have, let's say, 5, but they're all within 2 amas of one another, you don't look at all of them as being, it doesn't add up to 5 vines, because you're going to have to remove the ones that are just an amma away from the next one. B'cham ma'imrim kerem v'royenes ha'emtzayim ki'ilu einu. Chacham disagree with Shimon. It's not really they gave us. We just disregard. It is considered kerem, and we just disregard the ones in between. Which the way we've been saying it till now, it's not necessarily machlokes. The question is, do you say if they're too densely packed, we disregard all of them? The Chacham say no. You can only, if let's say you have 10, and if you take out all the ones that are just 2 amas from each other, you'll end up with all of them being 4 amas. You'll have still 5 that are 4 amas from each other. You could disregard the ones that are too closely packed. Rav Shimon says, no, you have to disregard everything. But in any case, you see that Rav Shimon's minimum density, it has to be 4 amas from each other. So we have both sides, both the minimum and the maximum, according to Rav Shimon. El Rav Nachman ali b'der Rabbanan. Well, as far as Rav Nachman, according to Rabbanan, Fuzon Shamin, we saw back on Pei Beis Amud Aleph, we saw the Mishnah, the Brisa, that said that a kerem has to be 16 amas. It can't be more than 16 amas. Once it's more than 16 amas, or it is 16 amas, one kerem, one vine from the other, then it doesn't get a din of a kerem. Retufin mishamin and late. But where do we see retufin? How do we know that 8 amas is the maximum or the minimum density? It can't be more than, you can't have them within 8 amas of each other. So Gemara Svarahu. Gemara says, no, it's a svara. We're able to extrapolate from the fact that we have by Reb Shimon that the vines in a vineyard, in order for it to be a kerem, cannot be more than 8 amas from each other, and they can't be closer than 4 amas. So we see that the minimum is half of the maximum. So we say that that's l'chayr by the Rabban also, even though we only know the 16 amas, that they can't be more widely dispersed than 16 amas, but we're able to extrapolate and say that we're going to have the same, it's going to be half what the maximum is going to be the minimum. I guess the idea is that a normal vineyard is, let's say, up to 16 amas, and that's the maximum. And we know that people will put as closely as possible. They're going to pack them in as closely as possible. So we know that they'll always do it half of what the maximum is will get you to what the minimum dispersal is. Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Helchasa me'aba amas vat sheish esrei. Rabba says that the psak halacha l'maisa is we take from both. We say the minimum is 4 amas and the maximum is 16. I don't know if that's maybe that's like a misafik. The Gemara Paskins, we're not sure who is right. So we say, even though I guess we're doing the most generous of what is going to be considered a kinyan, so l'chayr misafik you would do the other way around. You'd say it's a ma'itze mechaber of arayis. You wouldn't take from the purchaser under these circumstances, but that's what the Gemara paskins. The paskin that we paskin as far as the minimum, if it's as long as it's 4 amas from one another, it has a din of a kerem, and up to 16 amas. Tanya kavas derava kamim kuravin arba amas kamim rechukim sheish esrei. Hareza kana karka. We say he's kind of the karka together with the trees. So you see, paskins taka like both of the maximum and the minimum of the maximum of the bigger sheet and the minimum of the smaller sheet. So he's kind of the karka. It's considered that he gets karka together with the trees. And he also gets, if there are any small trees, any shoots growing up, you consider them as part of the karka. Those don't get their own din, and he kind of them as well. The fikach, yavash ilan and nixats yesh loy karka. Since he gets the karka, and this is what the Rashbam has been banging on the last couple of prokim, that he says, what's the nafkamina of whether you get the karka? The biggest nafkamina is that if the trees die, if they dry out, or they get cut down, the owner of the trees is allowed to replant them. Pachas mikana yeser al kan, but if it's less than this or more than this, meaning less than 4 amas or more than 16 amas, or even if he has 3 trees that are the right spacing, but he didn't buy them all at one time. He bought one day, and then next one the next day, and the third one the third day. He doesn't get the karka, he doesn't get the small ilanis in between. And therefore, if the tree dries up or gets cut down, since he doesn't have an entitlement to the karka along with it, he's not going to be allowed to replant it. Good morning. We just got up to a dot. Boy Rav Yirmiyah. About 11 lines up on the bottom from Pegim on Pegim Alamanal. It's going to be a sequence of a bunch of shilas. Right, we've been talking until now about the din of how, when you buy 3 trees, how closely can they be dispersed? How closely can they be planted, or how far apart they can be planted to still be considered a group of trees that you get karka along with. Boy Rav Yirmiyah, shu moedid imakum katu moedid imakum rachab moedid. When you measure a tree, as you know, right near the ground, the tree is at its widest, the trunk is at its widest, and it gets narrower as you go up. Amalei Rav Gvia mi Beiksil Rav Ashi Tashma Detnan. I'll bring you a raya from a Mishnah. Harakuva shebegefen, when they used to graft vines onto another grapevine. So when you have a vine grafted on, you don't measure from the narrowest part, meaning all the way up high where the vine is just a narrow vine, and you don't measure it all the way from the bottom where the graft is thick, but rather you go in between when it's starting to get a little narrower, but it's not as narrow as it gets. So that's the measurement for where on a vine you measure from one vine to the next to determine if they're the proper interval between one vine and the next. So you say, the Gemara is suggesting you do the same thing on a tree. You wouldn't go all the way by the bottom of the trunk. You wouldn't go all the way by the top where the trunk is very narrow, but you do halfway. Boy Rav Yirmiyah, machaloi shloisha bade ilan mao. The Rashbam explains, what is bade ilan? It means if you have a tree that the shirashim extend out over a wide distance, and some of the shirashim have poked out new shoots through the air, which we had a similar issue earlier, that what's going to be if a person has these shoots and then it gets covered over, which we said should be treated as part of the same tree. At the time that he sold it, these shirashim had already had shoots, but we were concerned, what if the earth covers them over and people won't realize? So what's he saying? He's asking the question, what if these roots are fully grown and they're really coming from the shirashim? They're not coming out of before when we had it was coming out of the trunk. We said, what if the bottom of those things that are coming out of the trunk, which is clearly part of the same tree, if those get covered over by earth, people will treat it as separate. But now we're asking the question, in general, if you have roots that are 4 amas away, 5 amas away, so they would be considered separate trees, but they share the same root system. And you have 3 trees like that. What's the din? Do you treat it as 3 separate trees that you get karka, or do you treat it as all part of the same tree? If someone planted the heads of 3 gefanim, and the Rashbam explains that what they used to do is instead of cutting off a shoot of a geffen, of a grapevine, and replanting it, they would just take the top of the grapevine and stick it in the ground, and it would take root, and that would be, eventually they would cut it in half, and they would have 2 gefanim. So if someone had 3 gefanim, they did like this. And like we said before, the amount of gefanim you need in order for it to be considered a kerem is 6. Unlike by trees that we've been talking about, you need 3. By gefanim, you need 5, I'm sorry. You need 2 plus a tail, you need 5. So this person made 6, which would be enough by doubling over, by planting the head of the grapevine in the ground. But if it's still attached, it means it's still attached in the middle. He never cut the middle. So he has 3 vines bending over. So the question is it treated as just 3 vines with the head in the ground? Or is it considered as eventually you're going to cut it in the middle, it's going to be 6? And that would be enough to be treated as a kerem, and everything in between it would have a din of client. And the you could still see where they're planted. If they have the proper amount of between 4 and 8 amas, he's paskening like Rabbi Yosef, mitzdarfen. Then you treat it as if you have 6. As long as they're properly dispersed, it's treated as 2 separate. Each one of them is treated as 2 separate gefanim. So you have a total of 6 gefanim, and it's mitzdarf. But if they're not 4 amas apart, it's not mitzdarf. In any case, you see that something that's attached, this is attached, and you see it over the ground. You treat each part of the geffen, the original geffen, as well as the part that you stuck the other end in the ground as a second geffen, even though they're attached on top. Certainly, if you treat them as 2 separate gefanim, certainly if you have 2 trees that they're just connected underground by their root system, but they're 10 amas, 5 amas apart, you're going to treat them as 2 separate trees in order to get to 3 trees that entitles the lekeach to also get the kar. Boy papa, machalo shnayim b'seich sadeu, be'echad al hameitzer. Now I'm going to talk about where he's definitely selling 3 separate trees, but there's some physical barrier between the trees, or a legal barrier between the trees. Can you starve them to treat them all as one? So the first question.
Obviously, they're within the regular distance, within the required distance.
Right, the distances are all good. We have the proper dispersal, but now we're talking about if there's an additional barrier, does that make it as if they're not considered to be one unified orchard because of that barrier? The first case is a pretty inconsequential barrier. If you had 2 trees that are in middle of Reuven's orchard, and the third one is on the border. Like we said, we've mentioned this a number of times. We used to have raised ridges that would run between fields or orchards, and very often they would make paths on those that people would be walking through the fields. And this was on top of that meitzah. Is that considered to be a separation that it's not counted together with the other 2? Then the Gemara continues another question. What if you have, let's say you say that those 2 are not considered, they're all considered to be together because it's all part of his property. What if Reuven has, the example for this would be, Reuven has 2 in his own field, and then he purchased from his neighbor Shimon, let's say 3 trees, where he gets karka along with those 3 trees. And now he wants to sell one of those 3 trees together with 2 that's in his property. And within Reuven's own property, he takes 1 from some trees that he owns by Shimon. Do we consider it that now Reuven is selling 3 trees together, and it's an orchard, and therefore they'll get karka? Or do we say, since one of them is part of someone else's bigger field, it's over the border, they're not considered to be unified? So Gemara, Teiku. Both of these questions, we don't have a definitive answer. Boy Ravashi. Boy Mausha Tafsik Amas Hamayim. I'm sorry, Boy Mausha Tafsik. The first question is, Ravashi asks, if you have a bar, if you have a covered over cistern that we've had that people used to store their water in it, and it's in between the trees, do you say that makes it that the trees that are physical, one tree is physically separated from the other 2, they can't be unified, and therefore the purchaser doesn't get a karka with the 3 trees. Then they're going to ask, what about Amas Amayim? What if you say that is considered to all be part of the same group of trees? But what if you have not just a underwater cistern, but you have a actual stream, irrigation ditch that's separating them? Maybe that would be mafsik. And if you say that even that's not mafsik, what about a Rosh Hashanah Ma'u? If you have a full-fledged public path. Now the Rashbam, the Rishonim clarify that it must be talking about Rosh Hashanah, not the Rosh Hashanah Deraisa that we talk about in Shabbos of 16 Amos. So according to all Shittas, if the trees are separated by 16 Amos, they're not going to be unified. It means the place that people walk through, but obviously less than 16 Amos. And even if you'll say that's not, Richva de Diklima, what if you have a full-fledged hedge that blocks people from going from one to the other? Maybe if you say all the other things are not mafsik, but if you have something that makes it that people can't go from one to the other, maybe that would block them. But the Gemara we don't know the answers to any of these questions. What's the din if a cedar tree grew up in between? Like we said, a cedar tree is very chashuv, even on its own. I guess we didn't know. We said about a sycamore and a decal. But an erez is also chashuv a tree, and it's a different tree. It's a different species than the ones that he's buying. Mao, what's your question? If he bought the trees and then the erez grew in it, it grew in his. He already has 3 trees, so now he gets a 4th tree because it grew in his property. Because it sounds like it says Allah erez that it grew. Ella haya erez by name. Now the question is obviously where the erez was there. At the time that he bought his 3 apple trees, there was 1 cedar tree in between. Do we say the cedar tree is mafsik between the other trees, and therefore it's not considered to be that you got 3 trees that were all together and you get the kark with? Amalei kana v'kana. He said to him, no, what's the big deal? He got the apple trees and he got a cedar tree thrown in. It's not mafsik. That was not a shayla. The Gemara asks now, we've gone through how dispersed the trees have to be in order to get the kark underneath it. And we've gone through what kind of possible hafsakas could be. Now the Gemara asks, what's the format? What's the arrangement of these trees? Rav Amar Kashura. Rav says they're piled up in a line. That means he has a line of 3 trees and he gets all the karka in between those 3 trees. Shmuel Amar Kachatzuva. Shmuel says it's a triangle. Manda Amar Kashura, the one who says you get it where it's in a line, Koshake Chatzuva. Certainly, if it's in a triangle, Manda Chatzuva. But the one who says that you get the karka when it's in a triangle, but he'd say, Kashura loy. But if it's Kashura, if it's in a single line, then the purchaser would not get the karka. That's not as good a kinyan that he's getting also karka together with his trees. Why not? Gemara explains why not. My timer, bishum demizdara bentayu, because when the trees are in a line, so the seller still has the ability. It's a line of trees, so it doesn't affect his plowing his field. He can go in between the trees. When you have an irregular shape, like a triangle in the middle of a wheat field, that's going to make it that the owner of the field who sold the trees, is he just going to circle around? He's going to avoid that whole section. But if you have a nice, neat line of 3 trees, he just keeps his rows right in between them, and it's easy to take care to grow things on his field. My timer, the loy mizdara bentayu. You're saying the reason, according to Mandam, who says it's only where it's chatzuva that the purchaser gets the karka underneath because the seller is not able to plow underneath in between the trees. So the reason is my time at loy mizdara bentayu. The reason why the karka is sold is because the seller is not able to grow there. If someone sold 3 thorn bushes, the loy mizdara bentayu. Thorn bushes, even if they're lined up, they grow up very big and they're bushy and they take up a lot of room. So nobody's planting anything near a thorn bush. It's difficult. The oxen won't go near it. So hachanami yesh lekarka, it should be even if they're straight. The person who purchases 3 thorn bushes should get the karka in between. So why would we say halacha? It's only chatzuv. It should depend on which kind of tree you're getting. If you're getting a thorn bush, which makes it impossible to grow in between, you should also get karka. He answers back, these thorn bushes are not chashiv. And you need, and the way the Rashba says, you need both. First of all, they have to be chashiv enough that they justify getting karka underneath it. If you're getting something that's inconsequential, someone says, I'll sell you my thorn bushes. He says, okay, you can take I don't care about the thorn bushes, take them, but he doesn't want to give up his karka with it. It has to be both that it's chashiv and that it's in a triangle shape, that it makes it impossible for the owner to till underneath it, to plow and till the ground underneath. But a thorn bush is missing the prerequisite that it has to be something chashiv. So the Mishnah. Hamoicher roish behema gasa lemachers haraglaim. I cannot explain to you why this is the way it works, but for some reason, often people would sell the head of a behema together with the feet. Machers haraglaim lemachers haroish. So if you bought we're talking about here behema, a large animal. So the raglaim have their own chashivas, and the head has its own chashivas. So if you sold the head, you don't get the feet. If you sold the feet, you don't get the head. And we're going to see that a behema daka is different. Since it's smaller, you go one together with the other. So that's really will make a little more sense why we're putting these things together. If he sold the kana is the part of the animal, the throat essentially, that you cut when you shecht it, and it's attached to the lungs. That's he breathes through the kana and it gets to the lungs. So when we say the kana, we're referring to the lungs. He doesn't get the liver as well. If he bought the liver, he doesn't get the lungs. That's all true by a large behema, by a small behema. So each of these things are smaller: the head and the raglayim and the lungs and the liver. So machers haroish, machers haraglayim. If someone bought the head, the person who's selling it normally would throw in the feet, the legs. I don't think it means the thighs. It means the feet, the hooves, I guess. He throws that in together with the roish. Machers haraglayim, machers haroish. But it doesn't go the other way around. The raglayim was smaller than the roish. Normally, you would throw in the raglayim together with the roish, but you don't throw in the head. The head is bigger than the roish, than the raglayim, so you wouldn't throw it in. Machers hakana, machers hakabed. If he sold the kana, the lungs, which is a larger thing, he would throw in the liver. But machers hakabed, machers hakana, wouldn't go the other way around. Arba midas. Now we're going to talk about Mishnah takes an abrupt turn. Arba midas meichron. There are 4 different types, 4 rules by meichron. Machal chitin yafis. If someone, the way Rashbam says it, if someone contracted to sell someone and said, I'm selling you good wheat, benimtsu rois, and it turns out that the wheat is not as good as advertised. It turns out it's shvacha wheat, that the 7 cows by Pare would have turned up their nose at. Halekech yachal lachsabai, right, like in Yosef's stream. Not Pare, yeah, right, Yosef. And then it turns out when the wheat showed up by the purchaser was rois. It wasn't as advertised. The person who bought it could say, listen, I said you said you're going to sell me good and you sold me bad. That's no, you haven't, you're not giving me what I was promised. But it's only the lekech could be chayzer, but not the meichel. Rois v'nim to yafis. It's the other way around, that he had said he was going to sell bad wheat, and it turns out by mistake the purchaser took good wheat. In that case, the seller could say, this is not what we agreed to. Rois v'nim to rois, yafis v'nim to yafis. If he said, I'm selling you rois, and it turned out it was rois, and yafis v'nim to yafis, ein echel mehem yachal lachsabai. Neither of them can be chayzer. I think some of the Rishonim explain why do you have to say this. Obviously, this is pretty obvious. If someone said he's going to sell something and he sold it, why would anyone be able to be chayzer? So the Rashbam gives a whole explanation. Even if the value went up in between, so that if the value went up, so then the meicher is selling something more valuable than he had agreed to, or it went down, he could say, I didn't. So the Rashbam says, let's say the value had gone down. This is Rashi in Divrei Maskal, and the case where the value had gone down. So now the lekech says, I'm not really interested in buying it. No. Yeah, we know there was a set market value that went up or went down in this case. It was originally, he said, I'm selling you good wheat, and good wheat at the beginning was worth 10 and now it's worth 5. So let's say he said, I'm giving you bad wheat, and it turned out it was like a bad wheat. It's because I didn't really mean it. I said I'm even willing to buy bad wheat, but that wasn't really my intention. I really wanted to get good wheat. I just was trying to be pleasant about it. Okay, but in any case, the Rashbam is trying to address what is the chiddush of this Mishnah. No, but in any case, the psak is neither of them could be chayzer because they got what they were promised. Shechamsis v'nimtza levein. But what if the value or the quality of the wheat was as advertised? But he said, I want to buy red wheat, and he got white wheat, or levein v'nimtza shechamsis. He said, I want white wheat, and he got red. Eitzim shel zayis v'nimtzu shel shikma. He said, I want olive wood, and he got sycamore wood. Shel shikma v'nimtzu shel zayis. Or he said he was going to get sycamore wood, and he got olive wood. Yayin v'nimtzu chaymitz yimtze yayin. He said, I want wine, he got vinegar, or vice versa. Shneim yichayil machzabay. If it's a different thing, if it's not just the quality that changed, but if he got something different, even if the values could be, maybe it's even better than what he had agreed to, but you got to get what you contracted for. You can't substitute it with something else, whether it's more valuable or less. Okay, we'll stop over here, and tomorrow we're gonna get back into. It's always a geschmacka topic when we talk about values going up and down. Always very confusing. Okay.
Again, have a great day.
Again, I'm not sure where I'm going to